When I married David, I understood life wouldn't be a simple straight line. He was a wonderful man, grounded, kind, and steadfastly loyal. But his world included a 17-year-old son named Ethan. Ethan's mother had been gone for 3 years, taken by cancer, and since then Ethan had retreated, becoming quiet, withdrawn, almost a ghost in their own home. I stepped into their lives with a heart brimming with optimism and a genuine yearning to forge a real family connection. Yet, hope alone couldn't dismantle the emotional fortress Ethan had erected around himself. David's work as an architect demanded long hours, leaving Ethan and me sharing the quiet house most weekdays. We occupied the same rooms, breathed the same air, but conversation was a rare bird. I explored every avenue I could imagine to bridge the gap. I'd leave out his favorite treats, attempt lighthearted chats about video games, and even enlisted his help with setting up our new smart TV. Ethan's responses were always polite, but delivered with a subtle air that he was merely tolerating the interaction, not truly engaging. Then, as autumn began to paint the trees around mid-September, things began to shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Initially, I wondered if I was just imagining it. Ethan started spending more time downstairs. He'd perch on the edge of the sofa while I prepared dinner, eyes fixed on his phone screen. If I walked in wearing my yoga clothes or a bathrobe, I'd sense his gaze flicker towards me for just a fleeting second, then snap away as if he hadn't looked at all. It wasn't overt, certainly not inappropriate, but it was enough to plant a seed of curiosity in my mind. Was it simple curiosity? Was it confusion? Or was it just the typical awkwardness of a teenage boy navigating the choppy waters of growing up? One Friday afternoon, I entered the living room after wrapping up a Zoom call, and I caught Ethan quickly flipping channels on the TV. The movement was so abrupt it made me jump slightly. "Hey," I said softly, trying to sound casual. "What were you watching?" He looked up, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Just some horror movie. It was stupid. Didn't think you'd like it." I offered a warm smile, aiming to keep the atmosphere light. "You know, I used to devour horror movies when I was your age. Now they just give me nightmares." He let out a small chuckle, but it felt strained. As he rose to head upstairs, I noticed the remote still clutched in his hand, a slight tremor visible. Perhaps it was nerves. Perhaps he'd been watching something he felt he shouldn't. But I didn't probe further. Teenagers needed their privacy, and I wanted to honor that boundary. Later that night, with David's gentle snores filling the quiet room, I found myself replaying that brief scene. I'd glimpsed a flash of skin on the screen before he changed it. Not enough to be certain what it was, but enough to stir a sense of unease. The following week brought more of these small signals. A look that lingered a fraction too long. A moment of hesitation when I entered a room. Once, I walked into the kitchen wearing a simple tank top and caught Ethan staring. Not in a way that felt wrong, but with that bewildered, uncertain gaze young men sometimes have when they're grappling with feelings they don't yet comprehend. Our eyes met, and his face flushed crimson before he mumbled something about homework and quickly exited. I didn't say a word. Not to David, not to Ethan. I didn't want to inflate it into a major issue if it wasn't. I attributed it to the volatile mix of hormones, lingering grief, and the inherent confusion of adolescence. Then came the Tuesday that felt like a turning point. It was a quiet afternoon. I had just returned from a workout class and was heading towards the laundry room to toss my damp clothes into the machine. Ethan was supposed to be at school. His schedule indicated classes until 3:30. But as I passed his bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. This alone was unusual. He always kept it firmly shut. I froze when I heard my name. "Sarah. She's not even my real mom, but I can't stop thinking about her." I stood rooted to the spot, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was Ethan's voice. He wasn't on the phone. He was recording a voice message to someone. "I know it's messed up. I know. But ever since this summer, it's like she's just everywhere. And the way she walks around the house, like she has no idea what she's doing to me, it's driving me insane." I retreated silently, a wave of nausea washing over me. He had no idea I was there. He didn't know I'd heard those raw, vulnerable words. He didn't know I'd seen the subtle signs, felt the awkward energy, understood more than he ever intended to reveal. I made my way back to the kitchen, leaning against the cool counter, trying to steady my racing breath. I was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Was he merely wrestling with private, confusing feelings, or were these thoughts manifesting in ways I hadn't fully grasped? Either way, I was now burdened with the profound knowledge that my stepson had crossed a significant emotional threshold, and I felt utterly unsure how to navigate it. That evening, Ethan was back to his familiar, quiet, polite self. He joined us for dinner, helped clear the plates, and offered a sincere thank you for the chicken stir-fry. But something fundamental had shifted, not just within him, but within me. I couldn't unhear what I'd heard. I couldn't pretend that moment hadn't happened. I spent the next few days moving cautiously, avoiding any direct confrontation. I wanted to approach this with sensitivity, with care. This was a young man grappling with grief, the complexities of adolescence, and the delicate dynamics of a blended family. The last thing I wanted was to shame him or inflict further emotional damage. But I also knew I couldn't simply ignore it and let it fester. The following Friday, I decided to gently broach the subject. "Ethan," I said as I rinsed dishes at the sink, "can I ask you something? A little personal?" He looked up from his phone at the dining table, his expression guarded. Sure. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by emotions you don't quite understand?" His brows furrowed slightly. "Like feelings?" "Yeah," I confirmed, nodding. "Feelings about people, about life, about attraction?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I guess, yeah, sometimes." I nodded again, drying my hands. "That's completely normal, you know, especially when you're still figuring out how the world works, or when you've been through a lot." He was silent for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Then, quietly, he said, "I think I need to talk to someone." That simple sentence stole the air from my lungs. I hadn't dared to hope he would say it. I turned off the faucet and fully dried my hands, turning to face him. "Ethan," I said, my voice soft but firm, "I think that's incredibly brave. And really, really smart." He looked at me then, truly looked, and in his eyes I saw a complex mix of shame, raw vulnerability, but also a silent, desperate plea for guidance. That weekend, I spoke to David about Ethan, suggesting he might benefit from speaking with a therapist. I framed it primarily around processing his grief, which was a genuine concern. David agreed without hesitation. We found a local therapist who specialized in adolescent trauma and family transitions. Ethan began attending sessions once a week. He never learned that I overheard him that day in his room. He never knew I saw the fleeting glances, felt the awkward energy, or understood more of his internal struggle than he ever intended to reveal. But I carried that truth with a quiet reverence, because while his thoughts might have wandered into confusing territory, his actions never crossed a harmful line. And sometimes thoughts, especially the tangled emotional ones of adolescence, simply need a safe, understanding space to be explored and untangled. A year passed, then two. Ethan grew taller, his shoulders broader, his confidence more evident. He smiled more freely. He started calling me Sarah with genuine warmth, not distance. And one day, on his way out the door, bags packed for college, he paused. "Thanks for being there," he said, his voice a little husky, "even when I didn't know how to let you in." Now he's thriving on campus, navigating college life with enthusiasm. He still calls once a week, sharing stories about classes, roommates, and the girl he's crushing on. And I feel a deep sense of pride, not because he got over something, but because he faced something difficult within himself and chose the path of growth. He'll never fully know how close things came to fracturing. He doesn't know I saw it, but I do.